This video will show you two different ways to measure a pH of a solution, using pH indicator paper and using a pH meter. At the end of the video will be a short description of how to calibrate your pH meters. Testing the pH of a solution with indicator paper requires indicator paper, a solution, a beaker to rinse into, and a glass stir rod. To do the test, you simply tear off a small strip of indicator paper, roughly a centimeter or so long. The next thing you should do is wet the indicator paper with a small portion of distilled water. And this is something that you should do with most chemical test strips. And even though this isn't strictly necessary for a pH indicator paper with aqueous solutions, wetting a chemical test strip for other materials, for things like peroxides, for example, is often required, so it's a good habit to get into now, even if it isn't strictly necessary. Once your indicator paper is wet, take your glass rod and dip it into the solution, and touch a drop of the solution to the indicator paper. Then you should wait a moment for any color change to occur, and then you should compare the color of your indicator paper to the pH color chart on the side of the indicator paper container. Once you find a color match, that color match tells you the pH of your sample to a whole number value. When you're done with your pH indicator test strip, don't throw it into the sink or leave it on the bench, but please throw it into the garbage can. The second measurement technique that we'll be talking about is using a pH meter. To do that, you'll need the LabQuest pH meter, a sample held in a small, fairly narrow container, and enough sample so that you can fully immerse your probe, roughly 30 milliliters. You'll also need a beaker for rinsing your waste, something to wipe and dry your probe with, and the pH measurement probe itself. You can start by plugging the pH probe into the back of the LabQuest pH meter. You can connect the probe to any of the channel slots, but I'd recommend channel slot 1. You should then turn the pH meter on by pressing the button in the top left-hand corner. And then you should be patient because these pH meters are very slow to turn on. Once the meter is completely turned on, it should automatically display the pH in the middle of the screen. When you have the probe attached and the meter turned on, you can remove the probe from its storage solution. To do this, unscrew the cap from the storage solution container, and then slowly and gently pull the cap off of the probe. Then set the container and cap aside. The outside of a pH probe is made from plastic typically, but the working part of the probe is made from glass and is extremely delicate. Part of the glass sticks out at the very tip of the probe and is the part of the probe that you actually immerse into your solution. Be very careful not to damage this glass piece of the probe. Before you can use your pH probe, you need to rinse it thoroughly with distilled water. Rinse the sides of the probe, and then pay particular attention to rinsing the glass bulb at the tip of the probe. Once you're done rinsing, you should blot the probe dry with a piece of paper towel or, ideally, a Kim wipe. In general, you should blot the probe rather than wiping it dry because the blotting process is more gentle. After the probe has been rinsed and dried, you're ready to start testing a sample or calibrating. To use the probe, you immerse it into the test solution and you swirl it continuously. Then you should wait for the reading to stabilize. And this can take quite a long time, upwards of over a minute sometimes. And after the readings stabilized, you simply record the pH to the number of decimal places that are shown by the display. You should then rinse your probe clean into your waste beaker Again, using lots of distilled water and paying particular attention to the glass bulb at the tip of the probe. And at this point, you can do one of a couple of things. You can either continue on to test your next sample, or you can put the probe away. To put the probe away, you simply place the cap back onto the probe, and then you screw the cap onto the storage container, and you adjust the probe down so that it's fully immersed in the storage solution. And then once you've stored the probe, you can simply turn the meter off and unplug the probe. Now, before you ever test a sample, you should make sure that your pH meter is calibrated. That is, the readings that it displays are accurate. To calibrate your pH meter, you're going to need to test calibration standards of known pH and compare those known pH values with the displayed values on your meter. If there are any discrepancies, you can adjust the display on your pH meter to fall in line with the calibration values. The instructions for doing that with your LabQuest pH meter are displayed on the screen here.